The crack of leather against flesh pierced the Montana air as Lillian Keyes stumbled forward, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. The year was 1879, and the western frontier showed no mercy to those who couldn't keep pace, especially not a woman alone on a convict labor crew building the Northern Pacific Railroad extension. "Get up, girl. You'll work till sundown like the rest or feel the whip again." Foreman Jasper Miller spat tobacco juice near her feet as he raised the braided leather lash for another strike. Lillian's cotton shirt clung to her back, bloodied from previous strikes. At 22, she'd been sentenced to 6 months of labor for a theft she hadn't committed. A trumped-up charge from a storekeeper whose advances she'd rejected back in Helena. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands across her dirt-streaked face as she struggled to lift another railroad tie. "That's enough, Miller." The voice came from behind them, deep and steady. The foreman turned, his face contorting with annoyance as his eyes fell on a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion. Samuel Nash sat easily in his saddle, one hand resting on his thigh, the other hovering near the revolver at his hip. His eyes, the color of weathered leather, narrowed as he assessed the situation. The cowboy's face was partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, but his jawline remained visible, tense and uncompromising. "This ain't your concern, Nash," Miller growled, the whip still dangling from his hand. "These prisoners are my responsibility." Samuel dismounted in one fluid motion. At 28, he'd spent more than a decade working cattle drives and had recently taken a job as a ranch foreman at the Double R, owned by a wealthy cattle baron named Richard Reynolds. The ranch bordered the railroad construction, and Samuel had been riding the perimeter when he heard the commotion. "A man who whips women ain't fit to be responsible for a dog," Samuel said, his boots kicking up dust as he approached. "Let alone people." Miller's grip tightened on the whip handle. "The law says I can use whatever means necessary to keep these criminals working." With surprising speed, Samuel lunged forward, grabbing the whip from Miller's hand. "The law doesn't say you can beat someone half to death for falling behind." He turned to Lillian, who was now watching him with wary eyes. "You all right, miss?" Before she could answer, Miller reached for his pistol. Samuel's hand moved like lightning, drawing his own revolver and leveling it at the foreman's chest. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. The construction crew had stopped working, all eyes on the confrontation. Miller's face flushed red with fury and embarrassment. "Reynolds will hear about this, Nash," he threatened. "Interfering with government business." Samuel nodded toward Lillian. "And the governor will hear about how you treat your workers. Now get your crew moving and leave this woman be." Miller hesitated, then gestured angrily for the workers to continue. "You've just made a powerful enemy, Cowboy." As the foreman stalked away, Samuel turned to Lillian. She stood straight despite her injuries, green eyes assessing him cautiously. "Why?" she asked simply. Samuel coiled the whip and attached it to his saddle. "No decent man stands by while a woman is beaten." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. "Water." Lillian accepted it gratefully, taking small, measured sips. "I'm Lillian Keyes, Samuel Nash." He studied her injuries with concern. "Your back needs tending." Lillian handed back the canteen. "Thank you for the water, Mr. Nash, but I need to get back to work before they notice." Her voice was soft but determined. 3 more months of this and I'm free," Samuel frowned. "What's your crime?" "Stealing a silver brooch." Her eyes flashed. "Which I never touched. The storekeeper's wife lost it and he blamed me because..." She stopped abruptly. "Because you wouldn't warm his bed," Samuel finished quietly. Lillian looked away. "You should go. Miller isn't one to forget an insult." Samuel watched as she turned to rejoin the work crew. "I'll be back tomorrow," he called after her. She didn't look back, but her steps faltered slightly at his words. True to his word, Samuel returned the next day and the day after that. He brought water, bandages, and salve for her wounds. On the third visit, he approached the camp supervisor, a man named Winters who oversaw the entire operation, including several foremen. "I'd like to arrange for Miss Keyes to work at the Double R," Samuel said. "We need someone to cook and clean at the ranch house." "Mr. Reynolds has authorized me to secure help." Winters peered at him over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Prisoners aren't available for hire, Nash. The territory allows for work release under proper supervision. I've got the paperwork right here." Samuel produced documents signed by Reynolds, who had considerable influence in the territory. Winters reviewed the papers with obvious reluctance. "She still has 3 months on her sentence, which she'll serve working for us. The territory gets paid either way." After several minutes of negotiation and a generous administrative fee that found its way into Winters' pocket, the arrangement was approved. When Samuel informed Lillian, she regarded him suspiciously. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Samuel helped her onto his horse. "Maybe I'm not fond of injustice. Or maybe the ranch house needs a good cleaning." As they rode away from the camp, Miller watched them go, his eyes burning with malice. The Double R spread across 5,000 acres of Montana rangeland. The main house sat on a rise overlooking a valley where cattle grazed in the summer months. It was a substantial 2-story structure with a broad front porch and large windows, far more refined than the typical ranch houses of the territory. Lillian stared at it in disbelief as they approached. "I'll be working here," Samuel nodded. "Mr. Reynolds is in Chicago on business for another month. It's just the ranch hands, the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, and now you." Mrs. Finch, a stern woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes, met them at the door. She assessed Lillian with pursed lips. "This is the girl you mentioned. She looks half-starved." "She needs rest and decent meals," Samuel replied, "and her back needs proper tending. In the kitchen, Mrs." Finch instructed Lillian to sit at the table while she prepared a basin of warm water and gathered medical supplies. When she saw Lillian's back, she clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Savages, the lot of them," she muttered, cleaning the wounds with gentle hands despite her gruff demeanor. Working women to death on those railroad lines. After her wounds were cleaned and bandaged, Lillian was shown to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror. "This was the previous cook's room," Mrs. Finch explained. "Get some rest. We'll start your duties tomorrow." That night, Lillian lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, she wasn't sleeping on hard ground surrounded by other prisoners. The bed felt almost unbearably soft, the silence disorienting after the constant noise of the work camp. A tap at her door startled her. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened it to find Samuel standing there, hat in hand. "Just wanted to make sure you're settled," he said. "And to give you this." He handed her a small leather-bound journal and pencil. "Thought you might want to write down your thoughts." Lillian accepted the gifts with confusion. "Thank you, but why are you being so kind to me?" Samuel shifted his weight. "When I was 16, my sister was accused of something she didn't do. No one stood up for her." His eyes darkened with the memory. "I was too young, too powerless to help her then. I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I could help." "What happened to your sister?" "She died in a women's prison in St. Louis. Fever." His voice was flat, but Lillian could see the pain behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," Samuel nodded. "Get some rest, Miss Keyes. Things will look better in the morning." The next few weeks established a routine. Lillian assisted Mrs. Finch with cooking and cleaning. Her back healed slowly, and as it did, her strength returned. The ranch hands treated her with respectful distance, taking their cues from Samuel, who made it clear she was to be regarded as staff, not as a prisoner or object of curiosity. One afternoon, while hanging laundry in the yard, Lillian noticed Samuel working with a young horse in the corral. His movements were patient and deliberate, his voice a steady murmur as he guided the nervous animal around the enclosure. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident but never threatening. Samuel glanced up and caught her watching. He tipped his hat with a small smile that made something flutter in her chest. Lillian quickly returned to her task, confused by her reaction. That evening, as Lillian was finishing the dinner dishes, Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Would you like to learn to ride?" he asked without preamble. Lillian dried her hands on her apron. "Ride a horse? I figured as much, but it's a useful skill out here." The next day, Samuel led her to the corral where a gentle mare named Daisy waited. With careful instruction, he helped Lillian mount and guided her around the enclosure. "Relax your back," he advised, walking alongside the horse. "Move with her, not against her." Lillian gradually found her balance, her initial fear giving way to exhilaration. Samuel watched her progress with evident satisfaction. "You're a natural," he said when the lesson ended, Lillian's cheeks flushed with the praise. "I doubt that, but thank you for teaching me." As the days passed, their riding lessons continued. Sometimes they ventured beyond the corral, following the creek that ran through the property. During these rides, Lillian learned about Samuel's life raised on a small farm in Missouri. Left home at 15 to work cattle drives, slowly building his reputation as a reliable and skilled horseman until Reynolds hired him 3 years ago. In turn, she shared pieces of her own story. Born in Philadelphia, orphaned young, traveled west with an aunt who died in Denver, leaving Lillian to make her own way. She'd worked as a seamstress, a laundress, and briefly as a schoolteacher before the incident in Helena that led to her conviction. "I've never been farther east than the Mississippi," Samuel admitted during one of their rides. They had stopped by the creek, letting the horses drink while they sat on sun-warmed rocks. "Philadelphia would seem strange to you now," Lillian replied. "So many people, buildings so close together you can barely see the sky." Samuel leaned back on his elbows, squinting at the vast blue expanse above them. "Can't imagine living somewhere you can't see the horizon." Lillian studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes. "I used to dream of going back east. Now I'm not sure I could." Samuel turned to meet her gaze. "The West gets in your blood." "Yes," she agreed softly, though she suspected it wasn't just the West that was working its way into her heart. Their moment was interrupted by the approach of a rider. Timothy Barnes, one of the ranch hands, galloped toward them, his expression urgent. "Sam, rustlers hit the north section. They've taken at least 50 head." Samuel was immediately alert. "Round up the men. I'll meet you at the bunkhouse." He turned to Lillian. "Can you make it back to the house on your own?" Lillian nodded, suddenly anxious. "Be careful." Samuel and the ranch hands were gone for 2 days. When they returned, they brought back most of the stolen cattle, but also carried a wounded man, Peter Lawson, a young hand who'd taken a bullet in his shoulder during a confrontation with the rustlers. The ranch doctor was summoned from town, but in the meantime, Lillian and Mrs. Finch worked to clean and bandage the wound. Samuel watched Lillian's capable hands with admiration. "You've done this before," he observed. Lillian nodded, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. "My aunt was a midwife. She taught me some things about tending injuries." After the doctor had come and gone, pronouncing that Lawson would recover with proper rest, Samuel found Lillian alone in the kitchen. "Thank you for helping Peter," he said. "The men are grateful. Anyone would have done the same." Not anyone. Samuel stepped closer. You're remarkable, Lillian Keyes. Her heart quickened at his proximity. I'm a convicted thief, remember? No. His voice was firm. You're a woman who was wronged, and he paused, seeming to struggle with his words. You what? She prompted softly. I find myself thinking about you more than is proper. His admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Before Lillian could respond, the back door swung open, and Mrs. Finch entered with an armload of vegetables from the garden. The moment shattered, and Samuel stepped away, tipping his hat before departing. That night, Lillian wrote in her journal by lamplight, trying to make sense of her feelings. Samuel had become more than her rescuer, he was becoming essential to her happiness. But what future could there be for them? She was still technically a prisoner, and in 2 months, she would be free to leave. The thought of departing the double R of leaving Samuel filled her with unexpected sorrow. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A telegram arrived from Mr. Reynolds announcing his imminent return, along with his daughter Margaret. The household burst into activity, preparing for the owner's arrival. Miss Margaret is particular about how things are done, Mrs. Finch warned Lillian. Mind your manners and keep your head down. 3 days later, Richard Reynolds arrived with his daughter in a fine carriage. Reynolds was a barrel-chested man with a gray beard and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Margaret was a beautiful young woman of perhaps 20, with golden hair and a fashionable traveling outfit. Lillian was introduced as the new kitchen help, her status as a prisoner on work release carefully omitted. Margaret barely acknowledged her, but Reynolds studied her with interest. Nash mentioned he'd hired additional help, he commented. Good to see the place well staffed. That evening, Reynolds summoned Samuel to his study. Through the closed door, Lillian could hear their voices as she delivered a tray of coffee. The Billings Bank is foreclosing on the Henderson place, Reynolds was saying. It'll be up for auction next month. I want you to look it over, see if it's worth acquiring. Yes, sir, Samuel replied. It's good grazing land from what I've seen. Take Margaret with you when you go. The girl needs to learn more about the business, and she enjoys your company. Lillian nearly dropped the tray. Setting it down on a side table, she hurried away before she could hear more. Over the next week, Lillian observed Margaret's obvious interest in Samuel. The young woman found countless reasons to seek his attention, requesting riding lessons, asking his opinion on ranch matters, even having him escort her on walks around the property. Samuel remained politely attentive, but nothing more. Occasionally, his eyes would seek out Lillian, a silent message passing between them that made her breath catch. One evening, as Lillian was returning from the laundry shed, Margaret intercepted her path. My father tells me you're actually a criminal, she said without preamble. A thief serving out your sentence here, Lillian tensed. I was falsely accused, Margaret smiled thinly. Of course you were, they all say that. She adjusted her lace cuffs delicately. I've noticed how Samuel looks at you. It won't come to anything, you realize. My father intends for him to manage all his holdings eventually. He needs a suitable wife, not a convict with nothing to her name. Lillian's cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. Excuse me, Miss Reynolds. I have work to finish. As she brushed past, Margaret added, Once your sentence is complete next month, I expect you'll be moving on. It would be best for everyone. That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. Margaret's words had struck a painful truth. What future could she possibly have with Samuel? Even if he cared for her as she did for him, the differences in their positions were insurmountable. The next morning, Samuel found her in the vegetable garden, harvesting early peas. I've been looking for you, he said. I'm riding to the Henderson place today to survey it for Reynolds. Lillian kept her eyes on her task. With Miss Margaret, I understand. Samuel frowned. Reynolds suggested it, but she's decided to stay and help her father with some correspondence instead. He hesitated. I thought you might come with me instead. It would be good practice for your riding. Lillian finally looked up. Is that appropriate? Probably not, he admitted with a small smile. But I'd welcome your company all the same. Against her better judgment, Lillian agreed. They set out after breakfast, riding north across the rolling grasslands. The day was perfect clear blue sky, wildflowers dotting the prairie, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage. The abandoned Henderson Ranch was a modest affair, a small house, barn, and corral situated near a bend in the river. They dismounted and secured their horses to a hitching post. It needs work, Samuel observed as they walked around the property, but the bones are good. Inside the house, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through dirty windows. Lillian ran her finger along a wooden mantelpiece. It must have been a happy home once. Samuel watched her as she moved through the room. It could be again. Something in his voice made Lillian turn. He stood in the doorway, his expression unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. Samuel, he crossed to her in 3 strides. I've been trying to find the right words for weeks now. His voice was rough with emotion. I'm not a man for fancy speech, but I need you to know that I care for you, Lillian, more than I've ever cared for anyone. Lillian's heart soared and plummeted in the same moment. Margaret said, I don't give a damn what Margaret said, he interrupted, or her father or anyone else. I'm still a prisoner, she reminded him, with nothing to offer you. Samuel took her hands in his. You're the strongest, most decent person I've ever known. You've endured injustice without letting it break your spirit. His eyes held hers. And if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly once your sentence is complete. Lillian trembled. And if Reynolds objects, if he threatens your position, then I'll find another position. Samuel's voice was steady. Or build something of my own. This place, for instance. He gestured around them. Henderson was asking a fair price before the bank took it. With my savings, I could make an offer at auction. You'd give up being foreman at the Double R for me. For us, he corrected. If that's what you want. In answer, Lillian rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Samuel's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as he deepened the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured against her hair. Their courtship proceeded quietly over the next few weeks. Samuel was careful to maintain propriety in public, but they found moments to be alone, early morning rides, walks to the creek, stolen conversations in the barn while he worked with the horses. Margaret observed them with cold calculation, but said nothing. Reynolds seemed oblivious, occupied with business matters that frequently took him to town. A week before Lillian's sentence was to end, disaster struck. She was returning from gathering eggs when she heard angry voices from Reynolds' study. Approaching cautiously, she recognized Miller's grating tone. She's a troublemaker, Mr. Reynolds. Caused all manner of problems at the work camp before Nash took her away. She's been nothing but hardworking here, Reynolds replied. I see no issue with her completing her sentence with us. The issue, sir, is that Nash falsified the work release papers. Miller's voice dripped with satisfaction. The signature from Judge Parker is forged. I've confirmed it with the man himself. Lillian's blood ran cold. Through the partially open door, she could see Reynolds' face darken. That's a serious accusation, Miller. It's the truth. Nash took it upon himself to remove a prisoner from custody illegally. That's a criminal offense. I've already spoken with the sheriff. He'll be here tomorrow to collect both her and Nash. Lillian stumbled backward, her basket of eggs crashing to the floor. Reynolds and Miller emerged from the study to find her standing there, face pale with shock. Miss Keyes, Reynolds began, but she was already running, heedless of his calls to stop. She found Samuel in the barn, mending tack. His smile faded when he saw her expression. "What's happened?" Between sobs, Lillian explained what she'd overheard. Samuel's face grew grave. "Did you forge Judge Parker's signature?" she asked when she'd finished. Samuel met her gaze steadily. "Yes. Parker was away, and Winters wouldn't release you without his approval. I couldn't leave you there another day with Miller. They'll arrest you tomorrow, send you to prison. Let me worry about that." He took her hands. "What matters now is getting you safely away from here. You've nearly served your sentence anyway." "I won't leave you to face this alone," Lillian protested. "You must." Samuel's voice was firm. "I know people in Wyoming who'll help you start fresh. With a reference from Mrs. Finch, you can find decent work." "And what about us?" "Everything we talked about." Samuel's expression softened. "That doesn't change. Once this is resolved, I'll find you." "How? Wyoming is vast." "I'll leave word with Jacob Turner in Cheyenne. He owns the Frontier Hotel." Samuel pulled her close. "This isn't the end for us, Lillian, just a detour." That night, Lillian prepared to flee. Mrs. Finch, informed of the situation by Samuel, provided her with food, a change of clothes, and a tearful embrace. "You're a good girl," the older woman said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Samuel met her at the stable just after midnight. He'd saddled Daisy and packed saddlebags with supplies. "Stay on the old cattle trail heading southeast," he instructed. "You should reach the Weber homestead by tomorrow night. Martha Weber will give you shelter." Lillian clutched his hands. "Come with me." Samuel shook his head. "If we both disappear, they'll hunt us relentlessly. This way, I can explain the situation to Reynolds. He's a reasonable man when he understands all the facts." Their goodbye kiss was desperate and brief. As Lillian rode away into the darkness, she glanced back to see Samuel standing alone, a solitary figure against the lantern light. The journey to the Weber homestead was arduous. Lillian rode through the night and most of the next day, stopping only when necessary to rest Daisy. By sunset, she spotted the small farm Samuel had described, a modest cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. Martha Weber, a widow in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, welcomed Lillian without question when she mentioned Samuel's name. "That boy saved my son from drowning 2 springs ago," she explained, serving Lillian hot stew. "Any friend of his is welcome here." Lillian stayed with Martha for 3 days, helping with chores while anxiously awaiting news. On the 4th morning, a rider approached Timothy Barnes from the Double R. "Sam sent me," he said when Martha brought him inside. "He wanted you to know he's been arrested, but Reynolds has hired a lawyer for him. The judge has agreed to hear the case next week." "Why would Reynolds help him?" Lillian asked, confused. Timothy grinned. "Turns out the old man has no love for Foreman Miller. When he heard the full story of how Miller had been treating the workers, especially the women, he was furious. He's launched an investigation into the whole operation." Hope blossomed in Lillian's chest. "So Samuel might be released." "There's a good chance. Reynolds has influence with the territorial governor." Timothy handed her a sealed letter. "This is from Sam." Alone later, Lillian read Samuel's letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Lillian, I face this trouble with a light heart, knowing you are safe. Reynolds has been unexpectedly supportive once he learned the full circumstances. Miller's cruelty was apparently not limited to you, and several former workers have come forward with similar accounts. The Henderson place goes to auction in 3 weeks. Reynolds has offered to advance me the money as a loan against future wages if I agree to stay on as foreman for another year. I've accepted. Wait for me at the Turners in Cheyenne. If all goes well, I'll come for you before the month's end. If not, Jacob Turner has instructions to help you establish yourself there. Know that whatever happens, my feelings remain unchanged. You have my heart, Lillian Keyes, now and always. Yours, Samuel. 2 agonizing weeks passed as Lillian made her way to Cheyenne, finding the Frontier Hotel exactly where Samuel had described. Jacob and Mary Turner welcomed her like family, setting her up in a small room and offering her work in the hotel dining room. On a bright autumn morning, as Lillian was arranging flowers on the dining tables, the hotel door opened. She looked up to see Samuel standing there, hat in hand, his familiar silhouette backlit by the morning sun. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lillian was running, and Samuel's arms were around her, lifting her off her feet as he held her close. "The charges?" she asked against his shoulder. "Dismissed," he murmured into her hair. "Reynolds testified on my behalf, and the judge was sympathetic once he heard about Miller's treatment of the prisoners. The territorial governor has ordered an investigation into the entire railroad labor program." Lillian pulled back to study his face. "And the Henderson place," Samuel smiled. "Ours as of yesterday. Reynolds kept his word about the loan." "Ours," Lillian repeated, hardly daring to believe. Samuel set her down gently and reached into his pocket, producing a small gold ring. "If you'll have me as your husband, Lillian Keyes." Lillian's answer was in her kiss, given freely before the smiling hotel guests and the approving Turners. They were married the following week in Cheyenne's small church, with the Turners as witnesses. The journey back to Montana took 5 days, each night spent under the stars as they talked about their plans for the ranch. When they finally crested the hill overlooking what was now their home, Lillian gasped. The small house had been cleaned and painted, with smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney. "Reynolds sent some of the hands ahead to help get it ready," Samuel explained. "A wedding present." Inside, they found the house furnished simply but comfortably. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a handmade quilt draped the bed, and a note from Mrs. Finch sat on the table alongside a basket of provisions. That evening, as they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Samuel wrapped his arms around Lillian from behind. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Lillian leaned back against his solid strength, marveling at how far she'd come from that terrible day on the railroad line. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. In the years that followed, the Nash ranch prospered. They added cattle and horses, expanded the house, and welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Samuel's sister. Reynolds became a frequent visitor and eventually a partner in their growing operation. Miller, they learned, had been dismissed from his position and faced charges of his own after the governor's investigation revealed widespread abuses. The satisfaction of seeing justice served helped heal the last of Lillian's emotional wounds. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Sarah, now 4, and her brother James, just beginning to toddle, Samuel took Lillian's hand. "You ever think about that day?" he asked. "When I first saw you on the railroad line?" Lillian nodded. "Sometimes. It was the worst day of my life and the best." Samuel's fingers tightened around hers. "I knew then, you know, something inside me recognized you even before I knew your name." "Knew what?" Lillian asked, though she suspected the answer. "That you were the one I'd been waiting for." Samuel's eyes, still the same warm leather brown that had first captivated her, held a depth of love that never failed to move her. "That some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." Lillian rested her head on his shoulder as the Montana twilight deepened around them. From tragedy had come triumph, from cruelty had come kindness, and from a chance encounter had come a love strong enough to withstand whatever life might bring their way.